Hey guys, today I have something a little bit different for you. I recently sat down with Epic Tales and his creative writing professor, and we had a really good discussion just on creativity, creative slumps, whether or not writers should be readers. We jumped through quite a few different topics, so me and Epic Tales have broken this discussion down into a few different pieces. I'm going to upload part of the discussion on my channel, and Epic Tales is going to upload the other part on his, because we don't want to subject you to like a 2 hour video. We broke it down into smaller pieces. Epic Tales, in case you're unaware, is another booktuber, another booktube friend of mine who has ridiculously well edited videos. If you haven't checked out his channel yet, go do that. He's also a writer and a fan of grimdark fantasy. So go and subscribe, whether it's now or after the video or during. Go check that out and look out for the other part of this discussion. Later this week, I'll have more of my regular stuff like a book review and some sketches. But yeah, here's the discussion.
I'm so happy. This is actually the first time I'm meeting David in person, but usually I'm watching his YouTube videos, which are actually so good, so informative, informational, informative. What's the right tone? Like I'm with writers right now. Help me out.
Informational.
Informative.
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 Yeah,
There you
that's the
go.
word I was looking for.
Informational, that's it.
What advice would you give somebody who's in a creative slump?
I mean, that's a great question because it covers so much ground, you know. But it's funny. I think my answer would be the same for a lot of different kinds of creative slumps. So I think my biggest question is why, you know. And I think that oftentimes it's very easy for someone to focus on the little micro details of that slump. So I don't know when to, I hate revising, for example, or I can't bring myself to put my butt in a chair and be able to, you know, just grind it out on the page or something like that, or face the page. And I think my question for both those instances is why, you know? What is it that someone would rather do? And I think the creative slump always comes from some sort of deeper root. You know, it's kind of like a tree. You know, it's like it's rooted in something, and the question is, what is it rooted in? And that I've taught these classes in which I'll ask someone to talk about what is the biggest problem with their writing process right now, you know, and oftentimes it's going to be a answer about a creative slump. You know, it's like, I'm in a creative slump, and then I'll say why, you know, and then they'll say something like, well, I find myself kind of like writing something out and then deleting it, and then trying to write something else and then deleting it, or something like that. And then I'll say like, okay, why? You know, I'll ask why one more time. And they'll say, it's because I feel as if what I do isn't any good, and I find myself kind of wondering whether I'm wasting my time writing at all, you know? And it gets very deep very quickly, you know? So in terms of a creative slump, I think a lot of paths just lead to the same place, which is there's some deeper thing that someone needs to address, like figure it out as a writer, before they can get out of that creative slump. You know, what is apparent to them is just the stuff on the surface. But when they start digging in deeper, it gets really deep, really quick. And until they address that, that slump is just going to keep coming back, or they'll solve it. It's like a band-aid, just temporarily. And that requires a lot of, I think, soul searching, a lot of digging, and oftentimes it's hard to do it without a sounding board, you know, being able to hash it out with sometimes other writers, you know.
What you said like resonated very much with me because so like everybody else, like I was going through like a slump, and like this slump came with like a very deep depression. Like I was having like things outside of writing affecting my mental state, and while that was happening, I was depressed because I wasn't writing. But then I couldn't find the motivation, I couldn't find the inspiration. I was just like floating around, you know. And for me, like when I was able to figure out, okay, like I'm actually depressed because I can't write and I'm not writing, and then I started like slowly, like just one sentence a day, like 4 sentences a day, and I was eventually able to get out of it. And something else that helped me rediscover my love and my enthusiasm to sit down and write was exposing myself to different kinds of stories. So like I watch like a Marvel cartoon or watch like the Avengers, and like reading really meaningful books and seeing how writers evoked emotions from me, different kinds of emotions, of pity, of disgust, of like anger, and like I'm just like, wow, like I remember that this is what I want to do, so like I what you said, I resonated with it very, very much, very much.
Sorry, it's funny that it's not funny. It's actually I think quite resonant with me. The link that you're making between writing and mental health, because I think going back to David, what you were saying about the creative slump, I think that a creative slump is not just a creative slump. Oftentimes it's a life slump. You know what I mean? It has to do with life. And of course, it's kind of like we as writers aren't just writers, we're also human beings, I think that's one of the reasons why talking to people about their writing process and blocks within the writing process, it means that things get very deep into life, and there is this kind of, I'm not a therapist or a counselor. I do work with counselors and therapists all the time. But yeah, it's funny. I noticed to myself that a lot of writers also think about, like, let's say, careers in mental health as well. So I wonder whether there is this kind of like, there's probably entire books that we can talk about. In fact, I know about books that talk about that relationship, like writing and healing, and that is a tight kind of relationship.
Yeah,
David, you're saying?
Just like for me, like I just like when I'm feeling like that, I just go and watch my favorite movie of all time, and I'm like back up.
So this question does come up a lot in the writing community. People typically get stuck or in a slump, and a lot of times what I tell like friends of mine, I'll be like, hey, pick up meditation or go for a walk or go for a jog if you can, just clear your head. And so I like how what you touched on was basically just asking why until you get to the root of it, because I think a lot of it, it's all in here, and you got to find a way to get out of that sometimes. And also to what you were saying, Epic, that watching other shows sometimes can bring that creativity back up. That's why I like watching like anime, and then
anime,
and mixing that with like so many different things. Like you can watch like an action movie, and then an anime, and then like grimdark fantasy.
Oh,
and then just have all this stuff.
Yeah.
I know you love it.
My question is, how do you differentiate, right, between critique? Like, how do you know what critique is constructive and is good? Because even sometimes bad criticism can be phrased in a way that it sounds constructive. So how do you differentiate between constructive criticism and criticism that is just nonsense?
Yeah, there's so much in there. And this is real talk right here. So I love the fact that we're having the real talk. So I think one of the things about like, is criticism constructive versus is it not? It depends a lot on whether or not someone is trying to get what the work wants, and sometimes this is even separate from what the author wants. It's as if the work has a life of its own, and it has a life that's apart from us as authors. Back in the Renaissance, there were a lot of writers, and it's probably not a mistake that it's also guy writers, as in like men, who are busy talking about writing as if it were like having a baby or something like that, and then it's like, looking back on it centuries after, it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe it's because these guy writers are busy being nervous about the fact that they can't have babies or something like that, but this idea that your writing or one's writing has a life apart from oneself, I think is pretty interesting. And from the point of view of, like, let's say a critic, a booktuber, or someone who's feedback, just someone who is taking your work and like offering criticism about it, if they are able to get into the head of the work and what the work wants, then I think it can be constructive for possibly what the work wants, and I think that sometimes that can be difficult for authors in the same way that, let's say, for authors, hearing something about, like, let's say one's kid, one's metaphorical kid or something like that can be difficult, because it's kind of like, it doesn't necessarily accord with like the child that we want or something like that, or our ideas about this life, this being or something, so I think that's one aspect of it. But another aspect of it, besides the work having a life of its own, is the act of putting writing out there, whether it's in a creative writing workshop or whether it's on a platform in which, like, people on the internet are commenting on one's writing, can be tremendously vulnerable making. That's obvious, right? Kind of like putting one's writing out there is tremendously vulnerable making because it can feel so close to us, and that act of making ourselves vulnerable in that way, in this proxy, which is our writing, to hear people offer critique about the writing, it can feel as if it rebounds back on us, and I think one of the things that's difficult around the norms of putting writing out there is not being able to offer, like, let's say, context around it, this is the way in which you can approach offering feedback about the writing, offering critique about the writing, because X, Y, and Z. It's kind of like there are these things that you need to know before you offer feedback on the writing. Now, let me just say that in creative writing classes, we have this artificial thing that we call the cone of silence, and what that means is that when a writer comes to the table, they're supposed to put the writing out there for us all to critique, and then they're supposed to not say a thing. They're supposed to be completely silent while people are busy offering criticism, critique on the writing. And oftentimes the temptation will be, but this is what you should know, this is what you should know about it. The reason why I did this was because, or something like that. And always the justification for this cone of silence is this idea that when you submit your work to a publisher, when you submit your work to a magazine, that person who is receiving it on their desk won't have that context with them. You won't be standing in the room saying, like, oh, this is what you should know about the writing before you read it. And the idea is that they're just going to read it. And so then in the creative writing classroom, the author must remain silent within this cone of silence, in order to get this critique, because in this, like, imaginary situation with the editor and the publisher, the writer will not be able to, like, talk about the decisions of why this and why that and what they should know and all that kind of stuff. Personally, I think that can be very limiting, and it shapes the kind of writing that, let's say, comes out of creative writing programs, the kinds of writing that, like, let's say, the ways in which people critique it on the internet, in person, all that kind of stuff. Like, let's say something like, you're doing this, like, weird experimental writing, right? That does all these, like, weird things with prose or something like that, or with the pages or something like that. And if someone is busy offering this critique from the place of they think they know what it's supposed to be doing, but they're wrong, the feedback could be like way off base and not actually helping it become more of what it wants to be. Note that here I'm talking about what the writing wants, more of what the writing wants to be. And it may well be important that they understand the process or the context within which this writing is interesting, but this idea that we have to have like the cone of silence and this artificial situation in which we are putting writing in front of a publisher or an editor structures like even the kind of writing that people produce. So Epic, the thing that I want to say is that there are definitely contexts in which being able to explain context around it is important. But then there's also this other norm in which it's kind of like people are not supposed to explain context at all as a way of getting at this idea of publishable work.
I'm self-publishing anyway.
Really like that idea of the cone of silence, because it makes me think of, similarly to the way I approach like criticism, things like that. It's like, I will listen to everything. That doesn't mean you have to take everybody's advice, but it's important just to listen to it, just to have it in your head, and just without arguing or without being like, well, no, just take it all in and just have it there and just be like, okay. And then you can kind of pick and choose what works for you, or because you know your story best. So you can be like, okay, this one was really valuable. This one, well, that's not the direction I'm heading. But so the cone of silence allows that to happen. And then what you were saying about releasing the story in the Discord, I briefly saw that you posted it and it said a grimdark story. So I'm absolutely going to check that out. I'll give you some feedback.
Thank you. Thank you.